Welcome back to another year of Ancient DOS games. Because my time off was notably unpleasant, I didn't end up as well rested and recharged as I would have liked, so I'm going to spend the month slowly getting back into things with some simpler videos, or if not simpler videos, videos on topics which are simple to make, such as with today's unusual game, Tube. Now, just like with Transland, which I covered a number of episodes back, this was a game made by a well-known game developer, but it wasn't really made for commercial purposes, as was originally meant as a programming exercise for one or more new employees, but ultimately got polished just a little so that it could be given out to gaming magazines in Europe as an exclusive title for them to include in their cover CDs, with very slight differences for each magazine so that the respective magazines could each be represented in the game itself, with the version I have being for the German magazine PC Player. Though my research showed there were also releases for another German magazine called PC Games, as well as one for the UK edition of PC Gamer. Because this thing was never intended to be more than a programming exercise, it's incredibly simple when it comes down to it, sporting only 3 levels, non-configurable controls, a handful of annoying bugs, and one of the strangest forms of perspective warping you're ever going to see, given that the levels are circular, but the aspect ratio is not, producing a wider elliptical view, which takes some getting used to. I mean, it's close to being circular for a properly stretched 320 by 200 display, but it's definitely not quite there. The internal project of Tube was originally developed by a small team inside Bullfrog Productions, using sound assets borrowed from other Bullfrog titles, which were in development or recently released, many of which seem to have come from Magic Carpet, as there's also images of the Magic Carpet box art in this game in various spots, with the last time the game code itself was touched being in late 1994. But the earliest release of the game to magazines to put on their cover CDs was in April of 1995 for PC Player, June of 1995 for the UK edition of PC Gamer, and I wasn't able to figure out which issue it was bundled with for PC Games. Now, I've also heard it may have been included with more than just these 3 magazines, so feel free to leave some comments if you know some specifics about other publications it was included in. The gameplay itself is best classified as a 1 to 2 player action/racing game, since while it's mostly a race against the clock, there's a lot of shooting to do in the process, supporting VGA 320 by 200 256 color graphics, and a small selection of audio devices, though I should point out that for some reason, the Windows sound system support is called Microsoft 16 in the setup program. I mean, the WSS is technically a 16-bit sound card, so that's probably why? I don't know, it's just a weird way of saying that. As for its current release date, it's technically freeware, but the details can be a bit muddy on this front, as Bullfrog either didn't explicitly tell any of these magazines how to treat the licensing, or the magazines weren't completely sure what to do with it either. But based on what I've read from the README files I could find, it seems that online distribution for no profit whatsoever is fine, while all other methods of distribution, free or not, are prohibited. So yeah, basically you can't paywall it and you can't distribute it via physical medium. It's a little awkward, but certainly not a hurdle anymore in the 21st century. As for physical copies, the only way you could actually get one would be to source one of the aforementioned cover discs, which would probably be incredibly difficult by this point in time. Again, for the German PC Player magazine, not to be confused with the short-lived British magazine of the same name, you want the April 1995 cover disc. For PC Gamer UK, you want the June 1995 cover disc, again not to be confused with the American edition of PC Gamer, and for PC Games, I have no idea, but you'd likely be looking for a cover disc put out around that same point in time. The gameplay for Tube may look a bit tricky, but it's incredibly straightforward. Each level is effectively a loop that you're performing laps in, with a sort of countdown timer at the top of the screen, though it counts down more slowly under very specific conditions, which I wasn't able to conclusively figure out, though it has something to do with how fast you're moving versus the kind of terrain you're over top of. The goal of the game is to simply complete 3 laps for each of the 3 levels in the game. If you run out of time during a level, it resets and you have to do the whole thing over again, though as long as you're not hitting a lot of solid walls or intentionally running below maximum speed, you probably won't run out of time. What you're more likely to run out of is health. Well, it looks like you only have 3 hit points based on those hearts. They're actually your extra lives. You see, the player has a health level which isn't shown anywhere on screen, and when you run out of health, a heart is consumed to restore your health to maximum. Now, you do get an extra life for every 1500 points that you can amass, but your lives do not get restored between levels or resets of the current level, meaning you can run your health down very easily given that you can be hurt by all kinds of things on each of the courses. So, to help ensure your survival, you've got a gun, but by collecting special red shards, you can power it up to multiple levels of power, which initially introduces a 3-way spread, then side-firing shots, then a laser which does huge damage, then finally special homing orbs which seek out targets, though getting it that high can be extraordinarily difficult and isn't even possible in the first level. The thing you gotta watch out for though is that these red shards are sometimes contained inside these metal barrels that you have to shoot apart. You can collect a red shard in a barrel without destroying the barrel first, but you'll lose some health doing this. Each level also gives you 3 bombs to utilize, which immediately clear all enemies on screen. Permanently. And normally things respawn the instant their spawn points go off screen and then on screen again, typically once for each lap. But the bombs also destroy the spawn points, so anything you take out with a bomb will not respawn for the remainder of a level. Thus the bombs are best suited to clear out tricky sections on your first lap so that they'll be free and clear for subsequent laps. I should bring up the controls by this point because they're clearly inspired by UK computer gaming enthusiasts, and while they're not bad, you definitely need to know what they are to survive. You accelerate with Q, decelerate and reverse with A, turn left and right with O and P, fire your guns with spacebar, and use bombs with the enter key. Pause is F8, quitting back to the title is escape, and quitting out to DOS directly is F10. I should also mention the controls for the 2-player mode are a bit unusual in that you can only play the 2-player mode with a joystick attached, as player 1 on the left will use the joystick, and player 2 on the right will use the keyboard, and this cannot be altered, though you can also use the joystick controls in the 1-player mode as well. There's a couple other odd things I should point out about the 2-player mode too. The first is that there's no time limit here. The game only ends if both players run out of lives. Otherwise, even if one player runs out of lives and the other completes the circuit, you move on to the next level. The other odd thing though is that both players are sort of playing in a weird parallel universe from each other. Basically, neither player can see each other, but any objects a player can visually see on their screen cannot appear on the other player's screen or vice versa. Plus, any enemies destroyed or power-ups collected stay gone for both players. Thus, eventually there'll be nothing left to dodge short of the track elements themselves. Now, I've mentioned the game's got some bugs, and they can be a bit insidious. One of the less annoying ones is that if you die from running out of lives and health and get a game over, if you continue taking damage, the game won't properly transition back to the title screen as your health will have looped around, meaning you now have to wait for your lives to also loop around before you'll be taken back to the title appropriately. Yeah, that's one of the less annoying bugs. Perhaps the most annoying doesn't really become a huge factor until the second and third levels, in that the camera's auto-centering algorithm can get thrown out of whack, and when this happens, yeah, the camera starts spinning uncontrollably and will never stop. Yeah, I'm cutting away from that to save you all the vertigo and motion sickness, but suffice to say, that bug can make it incredibly difficult to finish the later 2 levels. If you do reach the end though, you get taken to a 4th level in Ascents, which is really just a credit sequence that you can fly through. The only thing to do from this point forward is to hit escape to trigger the game over sequence and then enter your name for the incredibly slowly scrolling high scores table. Though one thing I should really mention, there's a cheat mode in this game, which seems practically lost to time. But thankfully, I was able to find the details by looking through archived pages online of the magazines this game was featured in. To enable cheats, you have to complete at least 1 lap in a track, make a high score, which shouldn't be too tough with the default high scores, and enter your name as JTY. which stands for Jaunty, the first name of the game's programmer. This will enable the cheat keys until you quit the program, at which point, if you start it back up again, you'll need to go through this again to re-enable the cheats again. Once cheats are enabled, holding the plus key down on the number row, not the numeric keypad, while in the middle of a level, will eventually give everyone max hearts and max gun power-ups. Though it may take a couple seconds or so to activate, I'm not entirely certain on the logic behind how this one works. The 1 key on the number row will disable all track collisions, and the 2 key will re-enable them. While disabling the track collisions is nice, this means the laps won't advance when crossing the finish line, so you kinda have to remember to re-enable the track collisions briefly when you get close to completing a lap. Lastly, for the budding modders out there, I just wanted to quickly show everyone that the actual level data is stored as raw binary with no obfuscation, with each track tile being nothing more than a short integer. This means making custom levels for this game is within the realm of possibility at the very least, though it definitely need an editor of some kind in order for this to not take forever. Overall, Tube is a fun little thing to mess around with for about a half hour or so, but it definitely isn't going to hold anyone's attention for any huge length of time, especially given the bugs it has. Well, that said, it is one of the more unique games in terms of its graphical style, if not its gameplay, so it's definitely worth checking out just to give it a quick try, but that's probably the extent of any enjoyment that you're going to get out of it. Yep, just leave cycles set to auto and the game should run perfectly fine. And even the joystick support works without any extra configuration, though I should point out that the game does not actually support using 2 joysticks, one for each player. Though using DOSBox's key mapping features can basically allow you to remap everything however you want for this game. So there's not really any worries about that unless you want to play this on period correct hardware. Anywho, that'll be all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Next up, 2 Saturdays from now, on the 21st, is a filler that I've had planned since the end of last year because it covers a somewhat modern game with a minimum system requirement of Windows XP, which I originally played back on Windows 98. And no, the game does not run by default on Windows 98. In fact, without some very interesting tweaks, it ran at about 1 frame per second. So this is a filler I've been wanting to do, mostly for the spectacle of how I originally played said game, but also to make people aware about tools which existed to extend the life of Windows 98 well past the point where Microsoft gave up on it. So be sure to stay tuned to see how this all plays out. Thanks for watching, everyone, and extra special thanks to all the folks shown here supporting me on Patreon. If you'd like to support the show directly and see your name here as well, head on over to patreon.com/KASICK.